In the early morning haze of August 11, 1934, a convoy of heavily guarded prisoners disembarked onto the fog-shrouded shores of Alcatraz Island. These 137 men, shackled and silent, were the first to populate the newly designated Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, a fortress intended to house the most incorrigible criminals in the United States. Among them were notorious figures like Al Capone, whose influence and notoriety had outgrown the confines of other institutions. Alcatraz, often referred to as the Rock, was more than just a prison. It was a symbol of the federal government's resolve to clamp down on the rampant crime of the Prohibition era. Situated 1.25 miles off the coast of San Francisco, the island's isolation made it an ideal location for a maximum security facility. The cold, treacherous waters of the bay served as a natural deterrent to escape, reinforcing the prison's reputation as inescapable. The daily routine at Alcatraz was meticulously structured to maintain order and discipline. The day began at 6:30 a.m. with a morning whistle, followed by a count at 6:50 a.m. and breakfast at 6:55 a.m. Inmates were then assigned to various work details, including laundry, tailoring, cobbling, and gardening. Rest periods were brief and strictly monitored, with another count at 9:30 a.m. Lunch was served at 11:30 a.m., followed by a return to work at 12:30 p.m. Dinner took place at 4:20 p.m. and inmates were locked in their cells by 4:45 p.m. The final count occurred at 9:30 p.m. with lights out immediately after. Despite its harsh conditions, Alcatraz offered certain amenities that were considered luxuries in other prisons. Inmates had access to a library with over 15,000 books and could participate in educational programs. Good behavior was rewarded with privileges such as movie screenings and musical performances. Al Capone, for instance, learned to play the banjo and even formed a prison band called the Rock Islanders. The prison's administration was unyielding in its enforcement of rules. Silence was mandatory during meals, and any infraction could result in severe punishment, including solitary confinement. The infamous D Block housed the most problematic inmates, subjecting them to complete isolation and minimal human contact. This psychological torment was designed to break the spirits of even the most hardened criminals. Alcatraz's notoriety was further cemented by its roster of infamous inmates. George Machine Gun Kelly, convicted of kidnapping oil tycoon Charles F. Herschel, spent 17 years on the island. Despite his fearsome nickname, fellow inmates reportedly dubbed him Pop Gun Kelly due to his exaggerated tales and nonviolent demeanor. Another notable inmate was Robert Stroud, known as the Birdman of Alcatraz. Originally imprisoned for manslaughter, Stroud became a respected ornithologist during his incarceration, authoring several books on bird diseases. However, his privileges were revoked upon his transfer to Alcatraz, where he spent 17 years in solitary confinement. Alcatraz's design and operations were a response to the failures of other prisons to contain the era's most dangerous criminals. The prison's strict regimen, combined with its isolated location, made it a formidable institution. Yet, despite its reputation, some inmates found solace in the predictability and structure it provided, a stark contrast to the chaos of their previous lives. As the sun set over the bay, casting long shadows across the cell blocks, the inmates of Alcatraz settled into another night of confinement. The distant sounds of the city were a constant reminder of the world beyond their reach, a world that, for many, would remain forever out of grasp. In the chapters to follow, we will delve deeper into the lives of these inmates, the infamous escape attempts, and the legacy of a prison that continues to captivate the public imagination. At 6:30 a.m. a piercing whistle shattered the pre-dawn stillness of Alcatraz Island. Inmates stirred in their narrow, 9 by 5 foot cells, each equipped with a steel-framed bed, a sink, and a toilet. The cells, devoid of privacy, were arranged in rows within the cold, concrete confines of the prison. This was the beginning of another day in America's most notorious penitentiary. Following the morning whistle, inmates had 20 minutes to make their beds, clean their cells, and prepare for the first head count at 6:50 a.m. Breakfast was served promptly at 6:55 a.m. in the mess hall, where silence was strictly enforced. Meals were simple but nutritious, reflecting the prison's policy of providing only the basic necessities. By 7:20 a.m. the workday commenced. Inmates were assigned to various labor tasks, including laundry, tailoring, cobbling, and gardening. These assignments were considered privileges and could be revoked for misconduct. Work periods were interspersed with counts and brief rest periods, during which inmates were allowed to smoke but not interact with one another. Lunch was served at 11:30 a.m., followed by a return to work at 12:30 p.m. The workday concluded at 4:15 p.m. and dinner was served at 4:25 p.m. Inmates were locked in their cells by 4:50 p.m. with lights out at 9:30 p.m. Despite the rigid routine, Alcatraz offered certain amenities that were rare in other prisons. The prison library, located at the end of D Block, housed a collection of 10,000 to 15,000 books. Inmates could request books by submitting a slip with their library card, and a librarian would deliver the books to their cells. The library's collection included works by philosophers such as Kant, Schopenhauer, and Hegel, as well as novels by authors like Jack London and Alexander Dumas. However, materials related to crime and violence were prohibited, and newspapers were not allowed. Education was also a component of life at Alcatraz. Inmates had access to educational programs that aimed to improve literacy and provide vocational skills. These programs were part of a broader effort to rehabilitate prisoners and prepare them for reintegration into society upon release. However, not all inmates experienced the relative privileges of the general population. D Block, known as the treatment block, housed inmates who violated prison rules. Within D Block, the most severe punishment was solitary confinement in cells known as the hole. These cells were devoid of light and furnished only with a sink and a toilet. Inmates confined to the hole were stripped of their clothing and subjected to complete isolation, often for days or weeks at a time. Weekends offered a brief respite from the monotony of prison life. Inmates were allowed to spend time in the recreation yard, where they could engage in activities such as baseball, handball, and chess. These moments of leisure were highly valued and served as incentives for good behavior. Life in Alcatraz was characterized by a strict regimen designed to enforce discipline and minimize opportunities for escape or misconduct. While some inmates found solace in the routine and the limited privileges offered, others struggled with the isolation and the harsh conditions. The prison's design and policies reflected a broader philosophy of punishment and control that defined the American penal system during the mid-20th century. In the next chapter, we will explore the most daring escape attempt in Alcatraz's history, examining the meticulous planning and execution that allowed 3 inmates to vanish from the island, leaving behind a mystery that endures to this day. On the night of June 11, 1962, under the cover of darkness and the ever-present hum of prison life, 3 inmates at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary executed one of the most daring escapes in American history. Frank Morris, along with brothers John and Clarence Anglin, vanished from their cells, leaving behind only dummy heads crafted from soap, toilet paper, and real human hair to deceive the guards. The plan had been meticulously crafted over 6 months. Using tools such as metal spoons and an improvised drill made from a vacuum cleaner motor, the trio widened the ventilation ducts at the back of their cells. They concealed their work with cardboard and paint, masking the noise with the ambient sounds of the prison. Once through the ducts, they accessed an unguarded utility corridor and set up a secret workshop above their cell block. In this hidden space, they constructed a raft and life vests from over 50 stolen raincoats, sealing them with heat from nearby steam pipes. Paddles were fashioned from plywood and screws. On the night of the escape, they climbed a ventilation shaft to the roof, descended a kitchen vent pipe, and navigated 2 barbed wire fences to reach the shoreline. At the northeast shoreline, near the power plant, a blind spot in the prison's searchlight coverage, they inflated their raft using a modified concertina and set off into the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay, aiming for Angel Island 2 miles to the north. The escape was not discovered until the following morning, when guards found the dummy heads in the inmates' beds. A massive manhunt ensued, involving multiple military and law enforcement agencies. Over the next 10 days, searchers found a paddle floating near Angel Island, a wallet containing the Anglin's personal information, and shreds of raincoat material believed to be remnants of the raft. However, no conclusive evidence of the men's fate was ever found. The FBI officially concluded in 1979 that the escapees likely drowned in the bay's cold waters. However, the U.S. Marshals Service has kept the case open, and over the years, numerous theories and alleged sightings have emerged. In 2013, a letter purportedly from John Anglin surfaced, claiming that all 3 men had survived the escape. The letter's authenticity remains unconfirmed. The 1962 Alcatraz escape remains one of the most intriguing unsolved mysteries in American history, a testament to human ingenuity and the enduring allure of the unknown. Beyond the cold steel bars and high-security cells, Alcatraz Island was home to a unique community. Approximately 300 civilians, including the families of prison staff, resided on the island. These families lived in government-owned apartments, cottages, and houses, creating a tight-knit community amidst the isolation of the island. Children growing up on Alcatraz experienced a life unlike any other. They played in the shadow of the prison, attended school on the mainland, and participated in community events. Jolene Babyak, who lived on Alcatraz during her childhood, recalled the island as a big playground and described her experiences as spectacular and lovely. Despite the proximity to notorious criminals, the families felt safe, with strict protocols ensuring minimal interaction between inmates and civilians. The community had its own social club, complete with a bowling alley and soda fountain, providing a semblance of normalcy and recreation for the residents. These amenities fostered a sense of camaraderie among the families, making life on the island more bearable despite its isolation. However, the operational costs of maintaining the prison were exorbitant. Alcatraz was 3 times more expensive to operate than other federal prisons, primarily due to its remote location, which necessitated the transportation of all supplies, including fresh water, by boat. The infrastructure was deteriorating, and an estimated $3-5 million was needed for restoration and maintenance work to keep the prison operational. On March 21, 1963, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary officially closed its doors after 29 years of operation. The closure was not directly due to the infamous 1962 escape of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, but rather the culmination of high operational costs and structural issues. The remaining inmates were transferred to other facilities, and the island was left to the elements. In 1972, Alcatraz Island was incorporated into the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, and by 1973, it was open to the public as a national park. Since then, it has become one of America's most popular tourist destinations, attracting over 1.4 million visitors annually. Visitors can explore the remnants of the prison, the living quarters of the guards, and learn about the island's rich history. Today, Alcatraz stands as a symbol of America's complex history with crime and punishment. The stories of the inmates, the guards, and their families continue to captivate the public imagination. The island serves as a poignant reminder of the human stories that unfolded within its confines, stories that continue to echo through the empty corridors and rusting cells of the once infamous prison.